Welcome to Back on the Broomstick,
a modern witch's spoken word grimoire,
where two witchy friends from way back are reconnecting to their pagan roots after a long period of mundanity.
We're rewalking the path of the wise and trying out all the latest spells, rituals, and magical theory in today's witchcraft and pagan practices.
So grab your wand and your incense,
your cauldron and your crystals,
and join us
as we get
Back on the Broomstick.
Welcome to Back on the Broomstick. I'm Layla, and on this All Souls Day, we'll be talking about someone every tarot reader out there can call on as an ancestress. The almost forgotten artist behind the most iconic version of tarot, what is known as the Rider-Waite-Smith version. And I don't mean Rider, who was the publisher, or Waite, who was the esoteric brains behind it. I mean Smith, Pamela Colman Smith.
Why do they always forget the woman?
Right? That makes me so frustrated. And not only was her name left off for decades, but she was barely paid anything for the artwork that she did.
Seriously.
She is the artist mother of the Rider-Waite-Smith tarot deck, now often called the Waite-Smith or Smith-Waite deck, if you prefer. So for this episode, we'll be focusing on Pamela, also known as Pixie, as well as her life, her art, and her huge influence on the tarot cards that we know and love today.
I'm really excited that we're doing this. And welcome, everybody. Chelle here. And I just want to say, there's more to the story than tarot. And I was just taken aback at Pamela Colman Smith's story. So we're going to dive into it and we're going to talk about a little bit more of her life other than her tarot piece. I was just fascinated.
When I first saw a picture of her, I was immediately drawn in. Her personality just crackles off the picture. You can see it in every single picture of her. You can see the life and the energy that she must have had.
When I see pictures of her, she reminds me of a tarot reader, someone that knows things. And obviously she knew things because these pictures, this deck, and you know, I have more decks than one person really should have. But this is the deck that has stood the test of time. I mean, this came out in 1909? And here we are in 2024, and it is still the most sold deck on the planet. Still.
There are over 100 million copies worldwide.
And I own probably 7 of them.
And when I first started out, my first deck was a Waite-Smith clone, and it was called a Rider-Waite deck. Never, ever heard of Pamela Colman Smith in the first several decades that I read cards.
Neither did I. Now, funny story. So, you know, I have this obsession, but I never, ever, ever would use the Rider-Waite deck. Never. You know why? Because it just felt too basic to me, even from the onset 30 years ago. I skipped over it. I didn't want it a part of my collection. I actually only obtained multiple copies of it in my collection in maybe the last 10 years. But you know, I've only used maybe 2 or 3 decks to consistently read with.
As much of a collector as you are, most of the time they're a novelty. You collect them for the artwork, and you might do a pull or two, but there's just a couple decks that you consistently work with for personal or for public readings.
I have avoided this deck for 30 plus years, and sure as shit, guess what I am using right now?
All right, to be fair, you say that you don't use a Smith-Waite version of the deck. However, anything that you think of as a traditional tarot deck is based on Pamela Colman Smith's artwork. Your favorite deck to read with for a very long time was the Ellen Cannon Reed deck. That is a Rider-Waite-Smith clone. Even though someone else redid the artwork, they're basically copying Pamela Colman Smith's artwork and the symbology that she worked into each of these cards. So it might not call itself a Rider-Waite-Smith deck or a Rider-Waite-Smith clone, but unless it's completely reimagined, most of the time, these decks follow Pixie's artwork. So I think your collection has a lot of Rider-Waite-Smith clones or decks that are very similar to her artwork, but I think you only specifically have a handful that are called Rider-Waite-Smith, right?
You know, I have, the mini deck, I have the Radiant, I have all the versions in my collection. But what I've been using lately is the Rider-Waite-Smith Centennial deck, which was a nod to kind of give her that recognition all these years later. It was a version of the deck that they took back to like her original, I think it's colors. If you look at the various versions, the coloring is different. And I think this version, the Centennial version, they took it back to the most accurate to how she released it originally as possible.
So let's rewind a little bit. Pamela Colman Smith was born in London to American parents. She was born February 16th, 1878, in Pimlico, London. And she traveled quite a lot with her family to the point where she lived in London, she lived in Jamaica, she lived in America, and then she lived back in the United Kingdom. She's a little bit of a mysterious figure. Even during her time, people weren't quite sure what to make of her. She was loud. She wore men's pants. She was colorful. She was ambiguous. They didn't know if she liked men. They didn't know if she liked women. They didn't know if she was possibly biracial. They didn't know where she came from. And she perpetuated a lot of these stereotypes. Her parents were writers and artists. Her grandfather was the mayor of Brooklyn. So her family was somewhat connected to the bohemian scene.
But still in an affluent kind of way.
And she spent quite a bit of her childhood. I believe she was about 5 years old when her family moved to Jamaica. And it very much impacted her to the point where when she came back from Jamaica, she would very often speak in a Jamaican dialect to kind of impress or fluster the people around her. And she wrote a book called Anansi Stories, telling the folk tales. And I believe it was the first book that published these verbal folk tales from Jamaica. And it was quite popular at the time. And she did that when she was 19 years old.
Wow. I did read one thing I found was interesting as far as her travels and whereabouts throughout her life is that she moved to a art colony in New Hampshire, which back then in that time period, who's moving to New Hampshire? Shit's cold up there. But yeah, no, she went up to New Hampshire and spent some time with an art colony up there.
Yep, she spent a lot of time at the Cornish Art Colony in New Hampshire. And it was a place for artists to go, be creative, and to be in nature. It was interesting because prior to that, she had spent time at the Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, New York, prior to going to the artist colony. And there she was exposed to everything. She like thrived in that bohemian atmosphere. And her art was passionate and expressive and inclusive and very much broke all the norms of the time. So she went from there to the Cornish Art Colony. And those are the two places that really formed her artistic expression.
They say that that kind of brought a lot of inspiration to her as far as drawing on spirituality and things, intuition in her art. And that was really a little bit prior to her doing the tarot deck. And I read in a couple different places that they think that her time spent in the art colony in New Hampshire inspired some of the backdrops of some of the cards, as well as her time spent in Wales and some of those backdrops inspiring the cards.
Interesting. She was a prolific artist in her early 20s. And her mother died when she was around 15. I believe while she was in Jamaica. She was very close with her father and traveled quite a bit with him. And he tried to help her once she published this book, Anansi Stories. And he actually introduced her to Bram Stoker.
I saw that. She actually traveled with Bram Stoker for a while and did a lot of work. And I was like, are you kidding?
Yes, at the time, he was like the stage manager for the Lyceum Theater. And so he managed all these actors and actresses at the time. And basically, Pamela Colman Smith charmed the pants off of him. She showed him these miniature sets and miniature dolls that she did all these plays with. And he immediately hired her to work on costumes and set design.
Another interesting thing, though, is that I think she spent some time with these folks in a period where there was a lot of, I don't know if fantasy and mysticism is the right way to explain it.
You're exactly right. I mean, the Golden Dawn was coming up.
Right.
Aleister Crowley was being weird at this time.
Right. There was a lot, like she was starting to get you know how it was like when we were in college, like the theater kids are kind of like
Yeah,
intertwined in that. And she was kind of that theater group kind of brought her into the Hermetic order. You know what I mean? They
they did.
intertwined.
That theater group was all people that were part of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. They were
Right.
all part of mysticism and learning all of this magic. And she was right in the thick of it
As an artist.
as
Yeah.
an artist. And one of the actresses at the time, like the premier actress at the time, was Ellen Terry. And Ellen Terry kind of took Pamela under her wing, gave her the nickname Pixie, because people said things about Pamela Colman Smith like she was that odd artist mystic girl. And other people said things like she looked like the goddaughter of a witch and a sister to a fairy.
That's a compliment.
Right? Seriously. But people would call her dark and mystic and witchy. And Ellen Terry was also very bohemian. She had lots of babies and lovers and was not married. And she was loud and proud and an
But
actress at the
bohemian in
time.
a more acceptable way.
Well, acceptable as an actress
Is
could be at that time, but she was also part of the Golden Dawn. And so they took her in and she started to go through the orders because the Golden Dawn has, they have stages, they have orders you have to go through. And Pixie kind of did some classes here and there, but most importantly, this is where she met Arthur
Arthur Waite.
Edward Waite,
Yeah.
A.E. Waite.
Now, one thing that she did as a means to earn money, that I could not believe this. This was one of those fun fact of the day things for me. She actually was quite the spearhead for supporting women's rights to vote.
Mm-hmm.
She was a part of that movement. She actually illustrated posters. That was some of the things that she did to kind of do her part for the greater good. She designed a lot of those posters. And I actually went back and, I don't know if you've looked at any of these or seen any of these. You look at some of those posters for the voting rights, they kind of look like tarot cards.
You can see that Art
You
Nouveau
can.
style. You can see her style really come through. And some of her artwork is absolutely gorgeous. It has been shown in a few places. And we'll get to how she died, but unfortunately a lot of her work has been lost.
It definitely was one of those things like diamond in the rough. I don't think at the time people appreciated her skill. And I think it's just because the time and period was very oversaturated with artists. You know what I mean? I mean, she did, she was in an art colony full of artsy people. She was in Greenwich Village full of artsy people. She was just, I don't think her personality allowed her to blow up while she was living.
She did a little bit. I mean, she illustrated a bunch of books. She was working quite a bit in her younger 20s, and she got this commission to work with A.E. Waite. He didn't pay her very much.
I heard her describe it as a lot of bit of work for a little bit of pay.
Yes, there are a couple books out, biographies that do have some of her letters and writings in them, so you can see what she says about this job. So, what they did was A.E. Waite, who was a mystic and a scholar and also a grand master of the Golden Dawn, had this idea for tarot cards. So, he met with Pixie, Pamela Colman Smith, and hired her to draw these cards. And he gave her very detailed instructions about the major arcana, but very little instruction about the minor arcana.
That wasn't a big thing back then, though, the minor arcana. Usually in the early Italian decks from, the 1600s and such, they were just almost like what we would look at as modern day playing cards. Some people call them the pip cards, or I call them the minor arcana cards, but they were just almost like a side thought to the major arcana.
Right, until Pixie came along and gave them life and gave them layers and depth that they had never had
And
before.
changed the world of tarot reading.
So now, instead of saying, okay, that's the 6 of diamonds, that means teaching, sharing, generosity, giving of yourself. Instead of memorizing that or looking in the book, you could look at the picture. You didn't even need to know what the 6 of diamonds meant or the 6 of cups or the 6 of pentacles meant. You could use the imagery and have a really damn good idea of what it means. And a lot of this imagery came from her love of mysticism, from Arthur Waite's descriptions of things, But it also came from an interesting place because Pixie had synesthesia.
What is that?
Synesthesia is basically where your senses in your brain get crossed somehow. So you can taste colors, you can see music, you can hear scents.
No shit.
No shit. And in Pixie's case, she said she saw pictures when she listened to music. And so very often when she did these cards, she would be in a meditative state with music playing, and she would do these paintings while she was basically channeling the music and these images that Arthur Waite told her about.
I think this is just my theory here. Who the hell am I? But I think that it was a combination of he did give her kind of the basis with the major arcana and a brief outline with just some brief bullet points on the minor arcana. And I think she took that, like you said, almost like channeling something.
Exactly.
Almost like, what do they call that again? When
A download.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
almost
No,
like
she really did.
combined the download with his bullet points and created the minor arcana.
It took her about 5 months to do it, and she based a lot of the cards,
Which
the
is not that
illustrations.
big amount of time.
No, she did 80 illustrations in 5 months. And some of them she based on people that she knew, like Ellen Terry is the Empress. Ellen Terry's daughter, Edith Craig, she's the Queen of Wands. William Terrace, who was an actor at the time, he's the Fool. The black cat on the Queen of Wands is a friend of her cat's named Snuffles. I don't know how true that is, but that's what I've heard. But other people were people that she knew in the theatrical world. She modeled some of the clothing on costumes that she styled from the Lyceum group.
The other thing I wanted to mention is that when she was doing some of these cards, and like you said, that she had come up with 80. Well, we all know a standard tarot deck is 78 cards. If you get the Centennial edition of the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, it actually does come with all 80 cards. And what the other two cards are just, I want to call it a painting, but it's on a tarot card. It's like artwork, but it's not actually a card. And I've actually used those, shuffled them in with the other cards, and there's only been a couple of times that one or both have come out.
Look at you using a mini magpie deck.
Shush yourself here. Shush, shush, shush. But it's almost like you put your own interpretation to it. It's almost like the Joker, the wild card,
I am a big fan of magpie decks, but what I mostly do is use a standard 78 card deck and then a few wild cards. And I started that a long time ago with the Londa Tarot. The Londa Tarot has a 79th card.
Yep.
It's beautiful. And it's called the Who Are You Really card. And that for me, when that would pop up, it could change a reading. It added an extra dimension. And so that's something that I'll do now. I love to add a few oracle cards in, or, a handful of wild cards as opposed to like a really crazy deck.
The two extra cards in the Centennial version, they're beautiful, as is the rest of the deck.
So now we're going to talk about one of my favorite mysteries.
You love a good mystery.
I do love a good mystery. One of my favorite mysteries about these tarot cards came before I ever heard of Pamela Colman Smith. And that is, on every single tarot card, there's layers of meaning. There's symbolism from Arthur Waite, mostly in the major arcana, and from Pixie herself, mostly in the minor arcana. But also on every single card, usually in the lower right-hand corner, you'll see this weird squiggly sigil, this symbol. Some people have described it as how do you say that? Catechus, a snake thing, a sigil, a symbol. Some people say it looks like some sort of, why does everything esoteric have to be Egyptian? But people are like, it's some ancient Egyptian symbol.
It's her initials, man.
It turns out it's her initials. When I was a kid, like I said, I learned on a Rider-Waite clone. And a lot of these clones will just publish the pictures straight over. And it will have her signature on it, which is this squiggly looking symbol. It's beautiful. She, at one time when she was at the Pratt Institute, one of the classes that she took was about Japanese art. And she learned about Japanese block printing. And a lot of times the way they'd sign it was these beautiful calligraphy initials.
Like turning your initials into a symbol or a sigil. Yeah.
And so part of the lesson was to create your own initial sigil. And she did. And so it's a P with a very long line, the C and the S and a dot.
Now, on the Centennial version, that is actually on the back of all the cards. It is as well on the picture, but it's on the back as well.
I can remember having conversations with other budding witches and tarot readers, and we did not know what this symbol meant.
We thought it was like some cryptic
I thought
thing.
it was some sort of sigil. I did not know what it meant. But I'm so happy now to know what it is. And it's interesting that its placement varies slightly, usually for artistic reasons. There are some people who will actually read that as a sigil, especially for the few cards that it's not on.
Now, I need to talk to you about something real quick.
Let me hear it.
Now, you know that I have been working on a project that I needed a tarot deck for, and oh Lord, I couldn't take one out of the collection for this project. So I had to go out and buy a specific deck.
Of course you did.
Because what I'm doing, I wanted, vivid, radiant colors. I ended up getting the Radiant Rider-Waite deck for this project. So I also have that right here, which the people can't see, but you can see. So yeah, I mean, I hear you. All the versions I have her initial sigil at the bottom. Not on this Radiant Rider-Waite. Her signature thing is not on these cards.
Oh, that's kind of fucked up, actually.
Like to the point where I seriously will like take a picture with my phone and text message. Like it's not on any of these cards.
What the hell?
It is on this other deck. They've taken her initial sigil off the card in this version of the deck.
While I really hate that, that's kind of bullshit. But for the most part, because this artwork is now technically in the public domain, people can just make a Rider-Waite clone or any way they want to. So if they're slightly redoing the art, I guess they don't have to put her signature on it. And certainly if they're reimagining the art, even if they're going off of her symbolism, I guess they still don't have to put her signature on it. But it's kind of bullshit. I object.
Who do I write? I protest. We need a petition.
That's fucked up. We need to have a petition. I mean, I am trying to call it the Smith-Waite deck whenever I can because seriously, Ryder, dude, you're the publisher. Sit back.
Who are you, dude? Who are you?
Sit down. These are not your nachos. Fuck off. It should be the
Seriously.
Smith-Waite deck. Sure, Waite is the author. Absolutely. He wrote the book. He wrote the definitions. Some people say that he switched the meanings of the swords and the wands in order to keep non-believers away. Chew on that for a minute. But
Different episode.
different
But-
episode.
No, this is definitely the Waite Coleman deck, in my opinion.
Put her name first.
Coleman Waite.
The Smith-Waite deck.
Smith-Waite. Okay.
Or
that
Coleman
rolls off
Waite.
the tongue.
I don't know. I guess you have to ask her, like, when is her name hyphenated? Like, is it Coleman Smith? Should it be the Coleman Smith-Waite deck? Or should it be the Smith-Waite deck?
It's not hyphenated, but Coleman was like they have it written like a middle name, but it is two last names.
All right, people with two last names. Would you be the Coleman Smith-Waite deck or the Smith-Waite deck or the Coleman Waite deck? I need to know.
Now I've gone down the road before where I had the hyphenated name in the past.
Yes.
And
Pain in the ass.
honestly, go with a maiden name. Rock it. You were born with it. Keep it.
She never married. So neither of those were a married name. That was the name she was born with. Pamela Colman Smith.
I am so butthurt that I can't get over it. I'm sorry. You're trying to move on. And I'm so butthurt that they took her initial sigil off the Radiant Waite.
I am
can't.
too. I wasn't joking about the petition. I mean, we should definitely write a very Karen letter to them.
A very caring letter.
We could get pretty Karen on their asses about that. That's kind of
Oh,
ridiculous.
you said Karen. I thought you meant caring. And I was
no,
like,
no,
have
Karen.
you met me?
Karen. Yes, Karen could be your middle name, but it's not. You're not a Karen.
There's my bitch for today. I'm mad at US game systems now.
Anyway, so she never did marry. So Coleman Smith is not her hyphenated married name because she never did marry. She threw lots of really fucking cool parties, to be honest. I wish I had gone to her parties.
When you think back, you know how you have these visions of the roaring 20s and these roaring 20s parties.
Yeah.
I feel like she threw a lot of them.
Yeah, me too.
Right.
Supposedly, there was like a list at the door and you had to sign up to perform when you went into one of her salons.
I want to be on her list.
Right? So she would act out and tell these Jamaican folk tales. She would have famous actors and singers and musicians all there performing for the fun of everybody. I'm sure the weed and the liquor and the opium was probably flying.
Imagine though, so you got this chick who's half Welsh, half Jamaican. Imagine
She's
listening to
not
her.
Jamaican.
I thought her mother was.
Nope, it's a rumor. Her parents were from America. Her mother's father was the mayor of Brooklyn. So that doesn't mean she wasn't Jamaican. There's just not a lot of proof that she was. And so there's been a lot of controversy about that. I mean, even when she was alive, she kept her identity very ambiguous. I think she liked the controversy.
Because they
So
said her dad was Welsh and her mom was Jamaican. Because I'm thinking, what stories? Think of that storyteller.
from everything I can find, some people thought she was. And so people were saying she was half black. And that's why the whole racially ambiguous thing came in. Because some people say her mother was Jamaican. Some people say her mother was white from Brooklyn. Some people say that she was half
Who gives
Japanese.
a shit? She was a good artist. Who cares?
Exactly. So it doesn't really matter. So nobody really knew. So that was part of her mystique, her charm.
It's almost like she never put in any effort to dispel any of the,
Oh no, she leaned into it. She leaned
yeah,
into it. She
almost like,
dressed wild
yeah.
and yeah. Yeah, she threw these parties. She dressed wild. She broke conventional norms. She said what she wanted. She did what she wanted. She never married. She did live with a woman for most of her life,
Like 20
up
years or
until
so.
she died. Yeah, for the last 20 years of her life. Nora Lake. And she wanted everything that she had to go to Nora when she passed away. But unfortunately, when she passed away, she was broke ass, completely broke. And they took everything.
What a shitty way to end such a rich life and such an impactful life. I mean, this poor woman died a damn pauper, and yet this is the most famous deck on the planet 100 years later. Like, what the hell?
I don't think at the time she had any idea the impact that she would make on the pagan world, on the tarot reading world. Because this is what I know. This is what we know. This is the imagery and the iconography. And these are the words that we know are the meanings of the Smith-Waite deck.
Not
You
to
know,
mention all those decks that I love and adore, and the decks that I actually use and are like my second hand. They're all just different pictures based on the Rider-Waite-Smith decks.
based on these images that she took all this esoteric knowledge that she learned in her life that she got from A.E. Waite, and she channeled it through her synesthesia into this magical, beautiful deck that we all adore. And, we're still now discussing the nuances of the different lines and the meaning of all the symbology that
It's
she
not
has
just
in these
artwork.
cards.
That's the
No.
thing, Layla. It's not just artwork. Like, this is the most well-known divinatory tool.
Yeah. And her
Like,
version of it is the most well known divinatory tool.
how do you die a pauper? Like, I don't get that. Society sucks sometimes.
It does. She did actually kind of reject all the mysticism in her later life and become more of a Christian. She got very much into Welsh fairies and fairy knowledge and fairy lore, but she became kind of a Christian in her later years and a little bit of a hermit. So she went from all these amazing parties. The conversations there, can you even imagine about
Wow.
magic and what an asshole Aleister Crowley was last weekend? And
Did you see what he did? Holy shit.
right? Right. And, what kind of alchemy and magic and ritual are we going to get up to this weekend? And it must have been absolutely amazing. And just the art,
I just picture her with one of those like long cigarette holders.
right?
Like just,
Lots of beads and scarves and harem pants. And
but I was gonna say, but going against the grain of the time and wearing the pants and
yep,
not the dresses. But I don't know, I have this
badass.
vision of her being just badass, being
Yep.
like, yeah, I'm one of the guys.
She fought for the vote for women's rights. She was loud and she was out there with her ideas. And what an amazing artist. Her works are beautiful. There are some places that they have shown her work in the past. I don't know if any of it is up right now, but I do know there's a couple amazing books, including Pamela Colman Smith, The Untold Story by R. Kaplan Stewart. It's a little pricey, saving up for it, but it's gorgeous. It has a decent history, a decent biography, but its big claim to fame is it has a ton of pictures of her art and her letters and, just pictures of her.
She has a painting called The Blue Cat that I came across when I was looking into her, and there's something about that blue cat that I just love. And I was like, damn it, why didn't she put that on a tarot card?
Right? I would love to have some of her artwork. How amazing.
Yeah.
The Whitney Museum of American Art did have some of her work up there, so you can see some of it there. But again, a lot of her work was lost because when she died, things got taken, sold, lost, destroyed, and that's pretty sad.
Well, and you also have to remember in the prime of her time, we were chugging through not only World War One, but World War Two, and that had an effect on some of the whereabouts of her art. And I think that also really did have an effect, honestly, on her credit or lack thereof from this deck. I mean, she was designing war posters. She was, like I said, she was trying to do the struggle to vote posters. I mean,
And I don't think
the war,
Arthur
I think the
cared.
war messed up her popularity because she had to divert her attention.
And I do think that the publisher and Arthur both didn't give a fuck.
I love that you just call him the publisher.
Fuck
You won't
that
even
guy.
name him. Won't even
No.
name him.
Seriously, though, the two of them basically were like, okay, here's your pennies for this art. Now go away.
How do we take advantage of this woman to get the art we need?
Exactly. They're like, go away, and we're going to sell this deck and we're going to name it after ourselves because we don't need you.
Screw Rider.
Right? Seriously. To know that they did that to her, that just kind of sucks. But she passed away September 18th, 1951, at the age of 73. And it does suck that we don't have our stuff. But this episode is coming out on All Saints Day, on All Souls Day. And what better ancestor to honor than to maybe pull a card for, do a little tarot journaling for Pamela Colman Smith, for Pixie. We're going to post some pictures of her on our socials so that you can see how cool and badass she looks. I mean, I want to be her friend. I wish I had known her. She looks like she was a fucking trip.
But she also looks like someone I would want to totally spend 100 hours talking about the tarot deck with.
Yeah. To go to one of these parties and to talk to her about her artwork and the meaning behind it and, the meaning of life, the universe, and everything while we smoke a joint or two.
How did you come up with
that.
a blue cat, Pamela?
Right. And when are we going to get the Blue Cat Tarot deck next?
Right, right.
That would be so great. But yeah, so she is an ancestor that I am definitely honoring on All Souls Day today. So thank you, Pixie.
And I sure as hell hope that she's haunting Rider somewhere. And I'm like, you are now known as he who shall not be named.
That's right. You're the publisher. Ha ha ha. So yes, pick up your Smith-Waite deck, pull a card for the ancestors today, and honor Pamela Colman Smith, one of our founding queens, one of our founding ladies.
Without her, it wouldn't be possible.
It would not be the same, that's for sure.
I would have 200 and plus decks that have just basically diamonds, spades, hearts,
Right?
and clubs on them.
That's
what
true.
fun would that be?
It would not be quite as fun. So thank you all so much for listening to this episode of Back on the Broomstick. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. Shell and I very much enjoy your witchy company.
Stay wise, stay wicked.
And keep it witchy.